Welcome to your final grammar lesson. The topic today, relative clauses. We use relative clauses to modify the head noun that they relate to, with the exception of sentential relative clauses, which can, for example, modify an entire sentence. Relative clauses are called post modifiers because they always appear after the head noun. The relative clauses begin with a relativizer, the word that introduces the relative clause. And there are three categories to choose from. The first consists of relative pronouns which, who, whom, and whose. These can be used both in restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses. Later on, I'll tell you about the difference between those. Who, whom, and whose are used with personal heads, that is, human heads. Which and whose with non-personal, non-human heads. Although some feel that using whose with non-personal heads is inappropriate, and they therefore want to use the of which construction. They can say, I have a plan, details of which I cannot now reveal, instead of saying, I have a plan whose details I cannot now reveal, which is perfectly fine as well. Another alternative is to front the of which construction, saying, I have a plan of which the details I cannot now reveal. The relative pronoun whom is used in the object position with personal heads, as in the waiter to whom you just spoke. If we start the relative clause with a preposition, we always need to use the pronoun whom. We can, however, have the preposition at the end of the clause, and then we can choose between who and whom, although whom is more formal. So therefore we can say the waiter to whom you just spoke, the waiter whom you just spoke to, or the waiter who you just spoke to. Three alternatives. The pronoun that and the zero pronoun are used in restrictive relative clauses only, and they are used with both personal and non-personal heads. The decision we already agreed on. Then we have the zero pronoun, or we can say a record that I listen to. And the third category consists of relative adverbs referring to time, place, and reason. The day when we got married, a place where I hang out, a reason why I should do this. These words, when, where, and why, are relative adverbs that all begin relative clauses. Now these can be changed to pronoun which, but then we need to add a preposition there as well, depending on whether we're talking about a place, time, or a reason. So the day when we got married can turn to the day on which we got married. A place where I hang out, a place in which, at which. A reason why I should do this, a reason for which I should do this. These are the words that begin a relative clause. Now, restrictive relative clauses. They are essential for the identification of the head noun. Let's have a look at an example here. My brother, who lives in London, sent me an email. We don't use any commas before or after a restrictive relative clause because we need that information to identify the head noun, in this case, the brother. In this example, this person has several brothers, and it was the one living in London that sent the email. If we had used commas over here, it would have meant that this person only has one brother. But here, because this part is essential for the identification of this, it is an example of restrictive relative clause, and no commas appear before or after those. In less formal registers, we can use the relative pronoun that instead of who, as in the girl that just went by, as opposed to the girl who just went by. And we can also choose to use the relative pronoun that instead of those relative adverbs. But then we need to add the preposition at the end of the relative clause. The house where I live can turn to the house that I live in. Should you use the relative pronoun which, you could say the house in which I live. But with the pronoun that, the preposition has to come at the end of the sentence, at the end of the relative clause. When the relative pronoun is in the subject position, it can be omitted in restrictive relative clauses. We can say the man you saw was not Elvis, because in this relative clause we have another subject and it's you. This relative pronoun over here is in object position and it can be omitted. If we want to, we can use the whom or that there as well, of which that is less formal. In this example, we cannot, however, omit the relative pronoun because it's in the subject position of that relative clause. The girl who knew too much died, or the girl that knew too much died. And notice that no commas appear before these relative clauses. And finally, a non-personal head, the car which or the car that ran over me fled the scene. Now, non-restrictive relative clauses offer additional information about the head. Now, these we separate with commas, and these we can leave out without changing the meaning of the sentence. We can say, have you met my husband Jim, who has a PhD in clinical psychology? This relative clause, starting from here, is purely additional information. We do not need this information to identify this husband Jim, because we already know who he is. Therefore, we use a comma there, and when we read out the sentence, we have a short pause there to mark that it is a non-restrictive relative clause. In the previous examples, we don't pause, so we say my brother who lives in London. If that was to be a non-restrictive relative clause, we would read it out as my brother who lives in London. The rioters, who were badly outnumbered, were soon taken to custody. This is another example of a non-restrictive relative clause, and it means that all the rioters were soon taken to custody, because we can take out this relative clause without changing the meaning. It's purely additional, and therefore we separate it with commas. And we can only use the pronouns which, who, whom, whose, as well as relative adverbs in non-restrictive relative clauses. And finally, sentential relative clauses. They can relate to the preceding predicate, like in he thinks I like him, which I do not. This relative clause relates to liking him. They can relate to the preceding clause, as in I've seen you run the marathon in 4 hours like nothing, which I could never do. So this relative clause, which I could never do, relates to this clause over here. Or then, sentential relative clauses can relate to entire sentences, as in he took me out for a dinner in a fancy restaurant, which was nice of him. Now this relative clause here at the end relates to the entire sentence. Sometimes we can use sentential relative clauses to relate to a series of sentences, as in the bus broke down, it was raining, I didn't have my umbrella with me, which was all just the beginning. In this example, the relative clause here does not relate only to the final sentence, but the ones before that as well. All of these sentential relative clauses offer additional information, and therefore we separate them with commas over there. Now, this was your final grammar lesson. I hope you had fun, and learned something too.